right?
Because I don't know if that's the best slogan right now. Is someone has been touching all of your whiskey?
Would you rather have one person touch it though, or like 50 people touch it? I'd rather have that one person.
I would rather have one person touch. What's up, guys, and welcome back to take 2 of the Whiskey Uncut podcast.
Florida storms, right?
Yeah, so we're going to give it another shot. It is storming outside. If the power gets cut out halfway through again, we may just have to miss
just
this
call
week.
Just call it a day.
Call it a day.
Yeah.
And go back and just do this episode later this week when there's not a lightning storm outside. So I'm Paul, your host, and this is James from Bourbon Sippers. And today we're doing Koval. They're our first brand sponsor for an episode. So they sent us these samples that won't influence our opinion because we didn't tell them like, hey, we're going to give you a positive review. But, you know, we're typically not going to reach out to somebody that we don't enjoy their product, you know, like, so.
Yeah, or at least we're not going to reach out to folks that don't have, you know, don't have interesting products. And that's, right. I think that's what really stood out with Koval for me. So, when I went to the distillery in like 2013 or 2014, I got the full tour and I talked to everybody, and I just came away really impressed with their approach to making whiskey. And, you know, set aside the products themselves and what you think of the products, just the way they approach it is really cool. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, the distillery opened up in 2008. And at the time, it was the first distillery back in Chicago since the mid-1800s. So
wow.
They had to, my understanding was that they sort of had to completely get the prohibition laws rewritten so they could come back in and set up a distillery in Chicago.
Yeah.
And they really focused on this idea of grain to bottle, meaning they go out and they pick the grain, they pick the barrel. At the time, they told me that one person touched the grain, touched the wood, made the whiskey, bottled it. Like, so literally one person touched it from beginning to end, which I thought was super, super cool. Whether or not that was like a marketing play or not, I totally bought it.
Did
like,
they wash their hands?
I hope so, especially now with COVID. I hope they're washing their hands, right?
Because I don't know if that's the best slogan right now is someone has been touching all of your whiskey.
Would you rather have one person touch it though, or like 50 people touch it? I'd rather have that one person.
I would rather have one person touch.
And then they also embrace this really cool idea that just everything they release is a single barrel. And so
I like that.
Yeah, you know, we've tried a bunch of different things on here before, and they, you know, we always compare the standard release to their single barrel. Well, with Koval, their standard release are their single barrels, and I think that's a really cool concept. The other thing is they take a lot of pride in the way they distill their products. And so we haven't really talked a whole lot about the distillation process on here. I'm not going to get into it too much because it's super nerdy, but the first part that comes off the still is called the heads. And the heads are really super harsh. If you guys ever go to a distillery, they'll usually take you through and they'll show you, they'll let you smell the heads. It smells like fingernail polish remover. It's where a lot of the methanol is, the things that make you go blind. It's bad news. So you want to keep that out, typically, or the majority of it out of your final product. And then the tails, to me, are kind of fruity, and they smell like wet paper.
Yeah, so like if you were to look at the shape of a still, and we can go into this more in a future episode, but the shape of like the neck of a still and the size of a still play a big influence in how that flavor gets imparted, because the heads are usually, they're the lightest vapors because that's what comes off first.
It's what evaporates first.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those are the lightest, the pure, like you said, methanol. And depending on the size and shape of your still changes how long that run of heads is versus the hearts and the tails. And so is this being done in a column still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's less important.
Or at least I think so. I'd have to look, but I'm pretty sure.
Versus a pot still with scotch. So the shape of the still can influence that as well. But you're right that the heads are those light, dangerous parts. And then the tails start getting some really cool, oily, thicker, fruity flavors, but they can get really astringent.
You get some of those fusel oils that really give it kind of like a almost like a gasoline type of smell when it's really heavy. But the idea is that if you blend a little bit of the head and tail in, you can get some really interesting flavor combinations and some complexity. So most places do that, whether they kind of redistill them or they blend a little bit in. Koval takes all of that out. So
It's
when
just hearts.
So yep, when you drink their product, it's just 100% hearts. So when you combine this very transparent grain to bottle with a single barrel product with just the heart cut, you get just it's a really cool approach, and it's one that I hadn't seen at the time when I went to visit the distillery. And so I knew as soon as we started this, these were one of the first people that I was going to get a hold of.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to do this lineup because I had not tried Koval until recently. We were looking at doing a single barrel pick, and I think we had already done a pick with them with jigs.
Yeah, and I brought that one with us today. We have
The rye
barrel. Yeah, the Rye-Den. It's a cast strength, like 6-7 year rye from them.
And so I've gotten to try a few samples of the rye and the bourbon, but I had not gotten to try the 4-grain that we have here. And it's all single barrels, so technically I haven't tried the bourbon or the rye either.
That's true. And I haven't tried any of these since I went to the distillery, besides the cast strength, recently that we tried of the bourbon and the rye, but I haven't tried their standard releases in 7-8 years. So for me, this is kind of a return to Koval a little bit.
Yeah.
And I should say too, if you are interested in organic products, all the Koval products are USDA certified organic, and they're also kosher. Paul and I talked. We have no idea what it means to be kosher, I don't think, or how you go about being a kosher whiskey. But Buffalo Trace just came out with their kosher line. It got a lot of pub, and the first thing I thought of when I saw that was, well, there's already kosher products out there, and Koval being one of them.
Yeah, so again, we have no idea what that means, but for the people that it matters to, that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And your choices are limited. Even if you look at just organic whiskeys, if that's what you're into and that's what you want, your choices are pretty limited.
Yep.
And I think this is a good chance to do that.
So if you're a Scotch drinker, Bruichladdich has some organic whiskeys, but again, it's a limited selection because there's not that many of producers of the grains that they need at the scale that they need and of the right varietal, all that stuff that plays into making the whiskey. You can't just pick any piece of corn and make whiskey from it. Just because it's organic doesn't mean it's going to make good whiskey. So it really limits their selection, but I really hope that as more distilleries do this, it becomes more prevalent, because let's be honest, like if smoky Scotch, right, if they smoke the barley to dry it and those smoke particles stay through the distillation process into the liquid that you drink, what do you think, like pesticides and like all that, like there's stuff getting in your whiskey, that if it's not organic is potentially influencing flavor or, whatever that, or even just general health,
Yeah, and I only play a scientist at the University of Florida. Like I don't really. Yeah. I'm a scientist, but
that was science.
This was science, yeah. But I'm not that kind of a scientist, so I would love to talk to somebody about.
I thought you were though. Aren't you like literally that kind of scientist with like plants and food and stuff? That's like actually the kind of scientist.
But I mean, to understand whether or not it makes it through the still, you would need an organic chemist, and that's not. Yeah, that's not what I am.
I'm gonna do the back of the napkin thing and say that if smoke makes it through the still,
it's probably true.
Pesticides and stuff, and other.
And it's certainly something that I've thought more
including what was ever on that guy's hands, who touched everything,
who touched all of it,
just
all of
it.
All. But I mean, we go to I really make an effort to buy organic produce now, and so I mean, if this is something that's important to you, like. There's not too many choices out there, and I think this is a really interesting
3.
One. They do. Yeah, and I think all of their stuff, whether it's they also do gins, they do liqueurs.
Oh, okay.
Their liqueurs are outstanding. They have a gin or a ginger liqueur that just blew my mind the first time I had it. It's amazing, and all of it's organic. Yeah.
All right. So first one, the bourbon, is 47% ABV, and distilled from 100% grains.
It is. It says 100% grains on the bottle.
So,
And we have mini bottles, right? These are 200 milliliter bottles.
Right. So there's not enough room on the label, as discussed in the previous episode.
Before the lightning strike and before we went off air, I guess.
And we're accounting for the small bottle flavor here in our tasting notes.
We are
in our judgment. So we're not holding these to the same standard as big bottle flavor, obviously. But yeah, 100% grains. What does that mean, James?
Yeah. So the one thing that people are going to miss in the redo is that I try to get you to guess the second grain in this, and I knew
it took me all of 2 seconds because my palate is absolutely incredible.
You don't even know what the grain is. That's what, and I sort of set you up for failure.
Mullet or something, right?
Millet.
Oh,
mullet is a fish. Okay. You don't want a fish to be your second grain in a whiskey.
Hey, no one's done it yet.
That's true.
So you don't know.
That's true.
If people are putting sheep poop from Norway
as their
in their
smoking
whiskey,
influence, we can put mullet in it.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, but what's super interesting about this bourbon is, to legally be a bourbon, it has to be 51% corn. But the vast majority of your bourbons are 70% corn plus, right?
Right. With about 20 to 30% rye and then 5 to 10% barley.
Yeah, and 20 to 30% rye would be kind of a high rye mash bill. But here we have 51% corn. So right at the border of what you can legally call a bourbon. And then there's one other grain, and it's 49% millet. And they have a 100% millet whiskey that I would love to try because I haven't had enough millet in whiskey products to know what it brings to this, but I know what it doesn't bring. It doesn't bring the spiciness of the rye. You don't pick up that. You pick up a little bit of the funky note that you might typically get with a wheated bourbon, and I'm assuming that's the millet. Yeah. But this is a really unique profile for a bourbon.
Yeah, so again, don't really know what millet tastes like on its own, but I would say the nose, the palate on this right up front is like honey and a little bit sweet, and that millet is clearly pulling back the corn because most whiskeys this age, most bourbons, I should say, this age, taste really corn heavy because there hasn't been a lot of time for the cask influence to be there, or if it's a high rye or a rye whiskey, they taste like the grain is very forward. So having that, dialing back that corn to the minimum, which is oddly unusual. I've always wondered why there aren't more whiskeys that play around with that other 49%.
I think there's more smaller distilleries now that are working with it.
Yeah.
I think we just tried.
But I mean, like,
it was Old Elk or something.
For a long
I think
time,
too, was like that,
all the big brands, they all pretty much cookie cutter in terms of their mash bills. But this is really interesting because that millet clearly dials back the corn sweetness. So it leaves you with like this little bit of honey up front. It gives you, I think you called it nuttiness.
There's a little bit of a nuttiness to it to me, and I think the thing that jumps out the most is vanilla. I get vanilla on it. But then there's this kind of almost peanutty note in the back to me that sort of lingers on your palate a little bit.
And I could definitely see like a little bit of like peanut shell, like the dust, the end of the bag kind of thing. But for me, like, it's a little tricky to discern the difference between that and just like the oak being there. And so like I got a little more of just like the toasted barrel note.
Yeah, and these are, so Paul mentioned that these are younger. These are probably, my guess is about 4 years. I don't think they give a true age statement on them. When I went to visit in 2013, 2014, they were younger. I think they were in the 2-year range. The other kind of oddity with these whiskeys is they're aged in 30-gallon barrels. So they're not your standard 55-gallon barrels that you see. They're 30.
Oh.
But I will say this.
Wait, is that so? A quarter cask is.
Oh, now you're going to get into Scotch notes, and I'm not going to know.
Man, now I don't know how big is a quarter. I think a quarter cask is slightly smaller than that. Because it's not by volume. I think it's a quarter. I'd have to look it up. I can't remember anymore.
I mean,
There's too many different sizes of barrels, but the important thing is it is a smaller barrel.
Right. In terms of American whiskeys, your standard is your 55, 53, 55. And then you do have a lot of smaller distilleries that age in smaller barrels, but they're typically 5, 10, 20. I haven't seen too many that age in 30. I do not get the small barrel funk from this that I normally do from like a 20-gallon barrel or a 10-gallon barrel.
That's because small barrels and small bottles have
it offsets.
They have opposite effects on a whiskey.
I didn't even think of that. We
So-
offset the barrel size with the bottle size.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's the problem.
Where have you been all my life?
People have been
Paul?
doing it wrong. For you distillers out there, the secret, if you want to use small barrels, is you have to put the whiskey in small bottles.
Oh, exactly.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it just tastes wrong. If you put a small barrel whiskey in a big bottle, it's obviously not going to taste
It's
right.
just misfit. You just changed the whole whiskey industry.
Revolutionary.
On this podcast.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're full of crap, but for the most part, like I don't taste small barrel in this, and I'm really, really sensitive to small barrel. That's why the vast majority of the time when I go to small craft distilleries, I don't like their products because you get this kind of chemical, artificial note that comes out of this much quicker aging process. It doesn't have time to mellow out. So I don't know whether...
And I'll just say, for those who don't know what we're talking about, a good thing to do, as much as I hate to support it, go on Amazon, buy the like $5 wood chips for quick aging whiskey. Make your whiskey 10 years old overnight. Go buy those and stick those in a really young whiskey, and then tell me how it tastes.
It's going to be dark, really young whiskey.
Right. And,
That's the
and
only
it's going to
difference.
taste like wood.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
but there's so much more when a whiskey ages than just oak flavor. The way the oak breathes and contracts with seasons, the way the whiskey goes in and out, all of that plays a factor in creating all these other flavors that is not just wood touching whiskey.
Right.
And so that's the problem with those young barrels aging fast, is it gets some components of that, but not all of it. So
Yeah, and I don't know what... I fully expected when I tried these, once I read 30 gallon, I fully expected to pick up that note of small barrel aging. I don't get it. I don't know if it's because the unique mash bills. I don't know if it's because they use only the hard cut. And so the whiskey that is interacting with the wood is interacting differently than it is at other places. Or if there's just some sort of magical cutoff, right? Where once you get above a certain surface area to volume ratio. So maybe once you get to 30, it's
also,
not as big of a problem.
climate in Chicago is probably, I mean, I don't know, but climate plays a big difference. Too,
It does,
in how whiskey ages. And so, you know, if you're sticking a small barrel whiskey in Texas where it's really hot, it's just going to
It's a bad idea.
Probably going to make that effect super dramatic.
Yeah, we have ones here in Florida that use 5 and 10 gallon barrels, and it's not a good idea.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Florida is not a place where you want to age whiskey anyway. But my take-home point is that if you're scared of the small barrel note, you're not going to get it in this product. You could pour this to me. I've had a ton of this kind of whiskey. I would never guess that this was aged in a small barrel.
I really like the nose on this one.
It's a really good product.
The finish isn't quite there for me, as it usually never is with younger whiskeys.
And it's at 94 proof.
Right, and it's lower proof, but it's not a harsh finish at all. It's just the honey, slight oak. I mean, it's very slightly dry, but it's just short. But I would drink this all day.
Yeah, I agree. Now,
Especially summertime. This is a perfect like summertime bourbon.
Yeah, I would agree. It's very light on your palate. I love the vanilla aspect to it. The official tasting notes that we got from Koval on this were, they say vanilla on the palate, so we're right on that. And then peppery caramel finish. I don't know that I get a ton of that. And then they say mango chutney. I don't even know if I would know what mango chutney tasted like if you like spoon-fed mango chutney to me. There's maybe a little bit of a peachiness to it that I get, but I don't know that I get mango chutney.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit of an esoteric tasting note. Like, that's so specific to like mango chutney. I've probably had mango chutney once in my life.
It's like the people who say marzipan, and I'm like, you don't even know what marzipan tastes like.
Or
just say almond.
Opulent.
Opulent. I forgot about
Yeah.
opulent. Would you describe this as opulent?
No, but one of these I would.
Oh yeah. All right.
Spoiler alert, since we just ruined it by doing take two. I've lied by saying that I haven't tasted these before because I just tasted them 5 minutes ago.
That's true. But we can't do anything about lightning strikes.
yeah.
So we're rolling with the punches here in Florida.
That's true. So what's the price on this for the full bottle? I don't know if you could probably buy the small bottles. Maybe at the distillery.
I think you can. Yeah, you can buy them as gift packs. I think at the distillery, so you can buy their whole standard lineup as a gift pack. But $7.50s if you find these around. I was doing a little bit of digging around on the internet. Anywhere from $50 to $60. I think mean is probably 50 to 55.
Sounds fair to me.
Yeah.